Welcome to Men Pursuing More. I'm your host, Roger Maupin. I believe every man has the potential to push past his limits and strive for something greater. Whether you're a former athlete who is looking for what's next, a professional pushing through the daily grind, or someone simply ready to break through life's toughest challenges, if you're ready to step into the pursuit of something more, your pursuit begins now. All right, welcome back to Men Pursuing More. I am your host, Roger Maupin, and today we have Evan Peterson joining us. So Evan, hey, we're not going to waste any time. We're just going to dive right into it. So let's first talk about you growing up. You grew up in many different areas in the country, and eventually you made your way to Lakeville, Minnesota. So tell us about some of those successes and challenges along the way and living in so many different locations.
Yeah, so I was actually born in Atlanta, Georgia. So about probably 30 minutes out of Atlanta, Georgia, but no one knows where Snellville, Georgia is. So I usually just say Atlanta. I was actually in Gwinnett County, but I didn't live there very long. Eventually, I moved to Kansas City, Missouri for a couple years and then moved over to Bristow, Virginia, which is just Northern Virginia area. And my dad was the reason we moved so much. He was in federal law enforcement and hopping around from different offices and ultimately landed in Washington, D.C. at headquarters. So the tough part of that is when you're a young kid and preschool, elementary school, and you're making friends and this is your community and you got your neighbors. And then all of a sudden, you're just ripped away from them. All these connections and relationships that you have that give your life meaning and purpose and was just ripped away from me. And it wasn't like I was depressed at that age or even knew necessarily what was happening, but I did develop a sense of not abandonment, but a sense of losing trust in people that they were going to always be there for me simply because I would establish connection and relationship and then I would have to move. And it would happen 3 times. And as a really young child, like you're developing, you're thinking, okay, I'm going to meet this person and I'm going to know them for 2, 3 years and then I'm just going to leave. So the whole idea of like lifelong friend or someone that's always going to be there for me was foreign. But I ended up living in like Northern Virginia up until late elementary school and then eventually moved over to Minnesota. And this was like the first real time that I was able to be planted somewhere. And my dad had made the promise to our family this was the last time that we were going to move because he's actually from up here in Minnesota. So it was me being able to be around my grandparents as well. And we have some family up here. So he made that promise. I started in I think 5th grade up here. So I was pretty young when I did move up here and lived here in elementary school, went to middle school up here, went to Century Middle School in Lakeville, Minnesota, and then eventually went to Lakeville North High School. And it was as prototypical, stereotypical middle school, high school, suburbia life that you could have. We had the nice house and a nice neighborhood and played the sports, had the friends, thought I had everything together, and then eventually got up to my senior year of high school. And that's where my story will probably keep going and some other questions. But yeah.
Yeah, tell us about that. Okay, now you moved to Lakeville. You have a lot to share and you can share with others or be relatable to some others that had to move around a lot. If it may be within a state or like you moved across the country. But tell us about that experience growing up at Lakeville North, especially probably in the athletic world. You had a lot of success, I know, in that area. And then eventually your journey to like Concordia University in St. Paul. And what were some of those like successes and challenges along the way?
Yeah, going to high school at Lakeville North, I had some really great friends. And the thing about Lakeville that's different than a lot of schools is it's so sports driven, where you'll go a lot of high schools in this area and sports are big, but I don't think people really understand that sports are like the full identity of a lot of students at Lakeville North or Lakeville South or schools like that, where we're so ambitious and we're so driven in that way. And we don't necessarily fall in the same ditches as other high school students, where a lot of high school students will fall into the ditch of maybe drugs or parties or alcohol, this stuff. And we would fall in probably a better ditch, right? As far as looking from the outside world of sports and academics and all these things, trying to find a fulfillment and satisfaction in those things. And that was me, where I was fully driven to be the best athlete I could be. I wasn't as driven academically as I probably should have been, but my whole identity was wrapped up in sports and how well I did in sports, whether I was a starter, not a starter, all those things. So when I did mess up, when I did fail, it felt like my whole life was falling apart. And I remember numerous times throughout high school where I would get done with a game or something, or I get done out of practice, and I would just feel miserable. I feel like I had no hope. I had nothing going on well in my life. I'm like, I'm not going to get the college scholarship. I'm not going to be able to reach my dreams. This is all pointless and worthless. And that's the pitfall ultimately of having your identity wrapped in one single thing.
Tell us more about, and I know your senior year, you had a lot of success. Your team, I know your football team did. And then just that shift to kind of Concordia University in St. Paul.
Yeah. So my senior year of high school, we had a really good football team, and I can't take too much credit for any of the success we had because it was just a lot of really talented guys around me. We had 3 or 4 guys go D1, and then 4 or 5 other guys go D2. We had a starting O line that was incredible. They were all like six. I think the average O lineman was about 6'3", 300, and that's in high school, and that just doesn't happen. And I'd be either at Wildcat quarterback or playing receiver, and it's really easy to run the ball when there's just a 5-yard hole wide open. You don't get touched by anybody in the secondary. But it was a ton of fun, and we ended up going 13-0, winning the state championship, and that's ultimately the crown achievement of every high school football player ever is, okay, I want to reach that mountaintop that is winning the state championship. And you think that it's going to be up there. You think whatever satisfaction or fulfillment you're looking for is going to be up there. Unfortunately for me, I won the state championship and it was fun. Like, by no means was I upset about winning a state championship. But you get there, and I was standing at US Bank Stadium, winning a state championship. And I remember standing there and being like, is this it? I worked my whole life for this moment, and that's all there is. I got a cool medal and got a cool ring that says I won a state championship, but at the end of the day, so this is leading into how I went into college. I went into Concordia St. Paul to play football, and half the guys won a state championship on my college team. Like, nobody really cared about that. So the thing that I thought was so important and so impressive, and I put my whole life into, ended up amounting to just about nothing. It actually made me the butt of some jokes because it's like, oh, he won a state championship. He thinks he's so great. And it's crazy how that works. But how I ended up at Concordia, it's pretty interesting because I had no intentions really of playing football in college. I was just I just came to the understanding that maybe because I always had that dream of going D1, like I needed to go D1. And when I didn't get necessarily the D1 looks because I had an injury my junior year, it really wrecked me. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to go D1 for track. That's what I'm going to do. And I had a pretty good track season and was thinking about walking on up at NDSU, running track. And then I ended up messing up my hamstring and realized, okay, maybe track isn't the right option. But the unfortunate timing was I hadn't gone to any of the camps. I hadn't been talking to any of the coaches that had reached out to me because I was like, I don't need to go. I don't want to go D2. I don't want to do this. And then eventually, my senior year, during the football season, I had a coach reach out to me who I had randomly met through my buddy was a long snapper, and he was like the special teams coach at Concordia St. Paul, and he had been his long snapping coach, and I used to just catch punts for him. And we had come to know each other, and he recognized me at, I think, one of the practices or something he came to watch, and we just sparked it from there, and it was because of him I ended up going to Concordia St. Paul and getting a scholarship there because I had turned down pretty much all the other colleges that were interested in me and pretty much said, hey, I'm going to run track, or I'm not really interested in D2. So I stumbled my way into Concordia St. Paul, but it turned out to be such a blessing. So
Tell us about going along that theme of Concordia St. Paul. Share with us some of the challenges that you may have faced in college, especially you focus more on your freshman year.
yeah.
And then share with us about SALT. Like many of the listeners out there may not know about SALT, and more of that kind of, I think, going into your second year, or maybe it was more the end of your first year, but
Yeah. No, for sure. I went into college and I was just seeing what the world had to offer. I grew up following Jesus. I grew up doing the church thing, and I really didn't have the relationship with Jesus. I wasn't following him. I was just living for the world, seeing what the world had to offer me. And I go into college and I'm chasing after the parties. I'm chasing after just being the best football player I can be, trying to be popular, trying to do whatever the world's telling me is going to fulfill me and satisfy me. And ultimately, when you get redshirted, you get really humbled because you realize you're not the big guy on campus anymore. You're not the best athlete on the team. You're really just not that important to the team in general. And honestly, from the outside looking in, it looked like I had everything together. It looked like I was doing well in football. Like I was on track to be the starter after my redshirt year. I had a ton of friends on the football team. I was one of the most popular people on campus. I don't know how to say that without it sounding cringy, but I was well known on campus. I was well liked. I went to the parties. I drank the alcohol. I had the girlfriend. I had all those things. On the inside, I was more empty and broken and lost than I ever was before. I was anxious and depressed, and I realized that what the world had promised me that would satisfy me had really left me just really empty and broken. And I came to the end of myself. It was Halloween night of my freshman year of college, and I had previously gone on like a party bus the night before, and I woke up just in some random person's apartment at the U of M to an alarm on my phone. And it was because I had morning lifting that same morning. So I'm calling up my buddy saying, hey, can you drive me to morning lifting? Can you come pick me up? I know it's like 3 a.m. I'm sorry. And I ended up getting picked up by him, getting my workout clothes, and then just sitting outside of my college weight room at 4:30 in the morning. Lifting didn't start till 5. And I was just sitting there and just taking inventory of my life and realizing how anxious and depressed and broken I really was, and how that all these things that I had been chasing after had just led me there. And it was really this, ironically, the come to Jesus moment that I needed, of coming to the end of myself and coming to the beginning of Christ, and realizing that my desires and my plan for my life were leading me to destruction. And he was just calling me to turn to him and follow him and ultimately find life in him. So it was that morning of Halloween, my freshman year of college, that I just decided, you know what? You're going to be Lord of my life, and I'm going to obey you. And I'm tired of being my own Lord. I'm tired of trying to be my own Savior, because it's just led me to brokenness and destruction in my life. So that day would be like the day I was born again, perhaps, or whatever Christian lingo you want to say. That's really the day that I started following Jesus. And a couple weeks to a couple months later, I end up stumbling into this college ministry called Salt Company. They have multi-generational churches that they plant on college campuses. Then out of that church, they plant these college ministries. And what it looks like is they have services on Thursday nights for college age students. And then they have, out of that, they have leaders that lead small groups on campuses. And it all funnels into the main Sunday church that is, at least in Minneapolis, it's called Redemption Church, but they have a whole bunch of names. So the whole model is they plant at a college campus or in a city with a ton of different colleges. So in my case, it was Salt St. Paul. We have Hamlin, St. Thomas, McAllister, Concordia, all those different schools that are funneling in to Salt St. Paul. And what was really cool was getting to watch it grow from when I stumbled into it is about 40 students. And within 3 or 4 years, it turned into this 1,000 person ministry, which is where it's at right now. So there's 1,000 college students gathering every Thursday night at 8 o'clock to worship Jesus, which is one of the coolest things that I've gotten to experience and be a part of. But yeah, and through that, being on my football team, I got to invite a ton of my college teammates and got to be one of those leaders at Salt where I got to disciple a ton of my
Mhm.
college teammates and be in these small groups and even getting to baptize some of my teammates, which is a surreal experience. And now watching a lot of those guys walking with Jesus and leading other people and becoming leaders and discipling other people, and just this cycle of discipleship has been so sweet.
So when you're talking about Evan, that's an amazing story. For you, what you overcame and just have the courage and boldness to move forward with this. And like with Salt, was that something that you got started with that freshman year? You said
Yeah,
after that
it
moment?
was the end of my freshman year. So there was probably a few months in between there where I was plugged in back at my church in Lakeville
Hmm.
and was just trying to find some type of college ministry, because that's what's so hard, especially in college, is finding a Christian community and finding people that are like-minded that will pour into you and build you up and lead you. And it was really hard for me to find up until I stumbled into Salt Company. And yeah, so it was later in my freshman year that I started going to Salt Company.
So would they have this service on Thursday? Would that be on a campus or would that be you talked about the Redemption Church?
Yeah, so there's actually a Salt Minneapolis for the U of M, and then there's also a Salt St. Paul. So there's two of them. Salt Minneapolis meets at the Redemption, so at that building. But Salt St. Paul, we've switched a couple different locations as we've gotten bigger, but usually we just rent out a church. So like right now we're at Summit Church in St. Paul. Before that we were at Vertical Church in St. Paul. But we have done stuff on college campuses. We have had services. We actually had our kickoff this year at Allianz Stadium, which was really sweet. So Allianz Stadium in St. Paul, so a giant stadium, and we had one of those sections, and it was a super sweet way to kick off the school year with Salt.
So was that with the St. Paul and the Minneapolis salt companies or like together at
No,
the Allianz?
it was just St. Paul, and there's about 2,000 students there, so it was really sweet.
Impressive. Wow. How did with SALT, how did that impact or kind of intertwine with like your academics or let's say more like with your athletics? Because you went
Yeah.
to the Concordia to play football. And so tell us how that kind of all intertwined together.
Yeah, so honestly, because of Salt, it made me a way better teammate and a way better student. I think the reason is because I started caring about how I carried myself, because now the things that I didn't just represent me, it represented one Christ, but it also represented Salt Company. I had all these different names on my back essentially. And I wanted to be the best teammate possible. I wanted to be the best student possible. I wanted to speak into professors' lives. I wanted to honor them and serve them. I wanted to honor and serve and love my teammates in the best way possible. And it was super sweet being able to do that. And honestly, it was really hard to do that. That was one of the hardest
Mhm.
things, just trying to be obedient and faithful. And I fell short so many times. And it was really hard because for the first couple years, I saw next to no fruit. It felt like just casting a bunch of seed and trying to share the gospel, trying to invite them to Bible studies, trying to invite them to Salt. And I really didn't have a ton of guys who were super interested for the first couple years that I was there. It wasn't until my third year that I started to see a ton of fruit, where I was seeing like 40 to 60 of my teammates coming to Salt regularly, a bunch of them coming to the small group, some of them getting baptized, some of them becoming leaders at Salt Company, and our leaders right now who are pretty much doing what I was doing when I was in college, where now they're the ones leading the small group. Now they're the ones trying to disciple these guys. And it's super sweet how you see like the cycles of discipleship. And it all stems from just this gospel centered ministry that Salt is. And they just teach the Bible. We don't do anything crazy on Thursday nights, and they don't do anything crazy on Sunday mornings. It's really just gospel centered teaching, just teaching the Bible, teaching conviction, convicting messages, and worshiping Jesus. And people are naturally drawn to that because this gospel is this thing that's giving people life, and they see the life transformation happening of these people who are a part of Salt Company, and they're like, man, I want that. I've tasted this and seen what the Lord had to offer, or I tasted and see what the world had to offer, and it left me empty. And then I tasted and saw what the Lord had to offer, and it healed me, it filled me, it gave me life.
So tell us, there may be some listeners on this podcast that may be interested in finding out more about, or they're curious or want to know more about this Salt Company. How do they find out about it on a college campus? There's so many things going on in a college campus. Like, how do I find out about this? Where do I go? And who do I talk to? And
Yeah, so first you can just go on Instagram and you can Google Salt Company, and then whatever college campus you're on or whatever city you're in. So if you're in like St. Paul, you just say Salt Company St. Paul. Their Instagram would pop right up, and they have all the details. They have a website, all that. If you're on a bigger campus, it'd be like Salt Company Nebraska, Salt Company Oregon, Salt Company Florida State. All those big schools have one. So it's literally as easy as one, either Instagram search or Google search, and you can get connected. And honestly, if you don't hear about it, just like person to person, that's on us, because we have a whole thing at Salt Company. It's called Mission to Campus, and it's like the first week of school, and you're out there flyering, right? You're out there just like trying to get the word out. And it's very rare, honestly, especially on these smaller campuses, that people don't at least hear or get an invitation to Salt. Now, on the bigger campuses like U of M, it's a lot different. There's so many more students and not the same ability to reach people. But that's probably why Salt St. Paul took off the way it did, because the smaller campuses and the amount of student athletes that got involved with Salt. And some of the most influential people at these smaller campuses are the football guys, are the basketball guys, basketball girls, volleyball girls. And we have a ton of those teams that got involved with Salt early, and then it just spread like wildfire.
you could have another whole podcast just on Salt.
Yeah, no,
You,
100%.
yeah, you've explained it well. If listeners are listening in and curious or wondering, you've given some good details on Salt and really understanding of Salt and what Salt is all about. And because there's many maybe college students that have no idea and never heard of Salt before. And let's, after college, share with us and share with the listeners kind of the direction you took. I know your first job, and then eventually I think you made your way into kind of the college or like a coaching. And then you also, I think now at this time in the education world. So just share with the listeners about that kind of journey the last few years.
Yeah. So I came out of college with a business degree, and I thought I was going to do something managerially. I was going to start my master's in business administration, and I got involved with stonemasonry. So I had a friend's dad who owned a stonemasonry company, and he welcomed me in to do a managerial role, but also get my feet wet in everything to do with stonemasonry, learn the trade, learn the skills, so that eventually I could either start my own company or inherit that company. So I did that for almost a year, and it wasn't that I hated it by any means, but I had a person reach out to me, one of my friends reach out to me about a coaching opportunity for high school football, and I really wanted to do it. And it's a little bit of the athlete bug where you're done with college football, you're done with whatever sport you played, and you're like, okay, I really want to be involved in it somehow. And that was definitely something I was faced with, which probably influenced my decision. But I was offered a position coaching, and I looked at my schedule and realized I wouldn't be able to do both coaching and the stonemasonry. So I really had to ask myself, is this what I see myself doing the rest of my life? And it wasn't like I made the decision overnight. It was a couple weeks and probably even a month of just thinking through all my different options. And eventually I landed on, I don't see myself doing the stonemasonry for the rest of my life, at least in that capacity. So I decided to go into coaching and ended up getting a substitute license just as some supplementary income as I'm figuring out what I really want to do. And so I was coaching football and just substitute teaching in some high schools. And I just fell in love with being in the high schools and being able to pour into students and speak life into students and just be around them and be just there's not many young male
Mhm.
influences at high schools. And I really saw that because I would be in the high schools, and I think I'd be the only guy under about 35 years old at that school. And I'm like, this is really a space that's missing guys who are leading in that way and just being a role model in a sense to a younger generation of men and to women too. It captured my heart. And then I ended up getting a job coaching varsity over at Lakeville South High School the next year. And I was during the summer, I'm like, oh, there's some openings, special ed resource teaching over in Lakeville. And a couple of the other coaches were special ed teachers and told me to apply and put in a good word for me. And it just, doors were opening everywhere. And I managed to land a role as a special ed teacher over at Lakeville North. And I've loved every minute of it, even the due process and paperwork that comes with special ed. I've learned to love it, and I love what I get to do. And it's honestly, I forget that I get paid to do it sometimes. Like I'm coaching football, and I'm being able to teach and just hang out with students all day, and it's so fulfilling and so fun for me. I would, I don't know if I would do it without the paycheck, but it's a ton of fun, you know?
What do you think? You're back at Lakeville North
Yeah.
teaching, but you're coaching at Lakeville South, where you went to school at Lakeville North and you won a state championship. Here you are, and you're back and you're coaching at Lakeville South. So how was that feel of being at a different school, kind of a rival in
Yeah.
Lakeville, being at Lakeville South, and you grew up like participating in sports and
Mhm.
at Lakeville North?
Yeah, I would say it's just Lakeville North and South, it's a lot like a sibling rivalry. So it's not like we actually hate each other. Like we're 100% rivals, but there's some love there too. And there's actually quite a few teachers that teach at North, coach at South, or
Okay.
teach at South, coach at North. And it is one school district, so it's not super complicated when it comes to all of that. But I really like it because I'm involved with some youth ministry around the Lakeville area and have a ton of Lakeville South and Lakeville North students that I get to be around both of them in different capacities. And it's been super fun. I call myself the unity guy. I'm the bridge, maybe.
The
Um,
Unity guy.
I love Lakeville North and I love Lakeville South. I love Lakeville as a city and the culture of the town and how sports driven it is. And it's fun just being in the middle and whatever tensions may exist. I like being the
Mhm.
one who's not super affected by those tensions and able to love people on both sides. I definitely cheer for Lakeville South when it comes to football. I am definitely a little biased to the team that I coach, but there's no bad blood on either side.
And they're the Cougars, right?
Yeah, go
Anybody that's
Cougars.
Cougars fan, you hear that? It's coming
Yeah.
from Evan.
Yeah.
What was some best advice that was ever given to you? And like, why was it the best advice and who gave it to you?
Yeah. I'll be honest, I don't know if there's like a phrase or something
Hmm.
that comes to mind because I was thinking through that the other day where it's, man, what advice? If I could tell anybody anything, what would I tell them? And not to be the hyper Christian guy, but it's obviously the gospel's number one. Like I want to tell everybody about what Jesus has done through his life, death, burial, and resurrection. But I think out of that, it was the first time that someone mentioned to me that my sin is killing me, but God loves me. And the understanding of what sin does, and sin is just this rebellion from God and what He's asking us to do. And I think it was the first time someone explained to me how the reason God gives us commands and instructions within Scripture is because He loves us and just wants what's best for us. And the reason He doesn't want us to sin is because He doesn't want us to die. And for 18 years of my life, I was enslaved and in bondage to my sin. And it was controlling every aspect of my life. And it was leading me ultimately to death. And it had already caused a ton of destruction and division in my life. So I think the best advice I've been given is one, the gospel, and two, just the clarity of that gospel and the reality that my sin was the thing that was actively killing me, and Christ set me free from that so that I could find life in him. But yeah, I would say that's the best advice, and out of that flows a million different things. We could do a whole podcast on
Oh, we could, yeah.
100%, but I would say that's the best thing. I'd say the one thing I tell my students all the time is, because it's so easy to make assumptions about what other people think. So this is a totally different tangent, but it's so easy for us to assume what other people are thinking, and we create these scenarios in our heads. And I'm always telling my students, one, as much as you think people are thinking about you, they're not actually thinking about you that much. And then two, I always say this quote, one of my students, she said she's going to put it on a t-shirt for me because I say it so much. And it's the quote, that's what they think. That's not what you thought. So the whole idea is like, whatever you think they're thinking right now, they're not actually thinking
Probably
that.
not
And you're
thinking.
just putting words in their mouth and doing all these assumptions. And it's because I'm dealing with a bunch of high school students and all this drama. And I'm trying to think, hey, why are you so suspicious of people? Why do you assume the worst?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that goes hand in hand with the gospel and understanding that the problem with the world isn't everyone else, it's me. And we need to be a lot tougher on ourselves and a lot gentler with others. And that would have some pretty good fruit. So
That kind of leads into wrapping up this podcast. About any other final thoughts, because you've already given us some thoughts. Any other final thoughts that you want to leave with men, all different ages?
yeah,
Because we know maturity has nothing to do with age.
no.
To leave with men as they continue on their journey personally or professionally.
Yeah, I think the one thing, if I could tell every guy one thing, I think it'd ultimately be, I have never regretted being obedient to God. I've regretted being disobedient to God, like every single time. If anything in our lives was 100% perfect and accurate, we would probably trust that. So if I were going to shoot a three-pointer and I made it 100% of the time, I would always shoot the three-pointer because I know I would make it. In the same way, I look at my life and I look at all the times I've been disobedient to God, and I've watched how it's led to destruction, division, and ultimately death to relationships and death to me spiritually, and a lot of hurt and pain in other people's lives. Where I look at when I've been obedient to God, although it may not look like it at the time, it may be really hard at the time, ultimately it leads to reconciliation, it leads to restoration, and it leads to life and life more abundantly. And when we align ourselves with the will of God, and we align ourselves with the way we were created to live, which is ultimately what Scripture is, you're going to see life abundantly. You're going to live a fruitful life. And it might not mean the most prosperous life. It might not mean you're going to be happy, healthy, and wealthy, but it does mean you're going to be holy. And that's eternal wealth. So that would be my best advice. I've already obviously covered a ton of things like that during this podcast, but.
All right, Evan Peterson. Hey, that's a wrap. We appreciate you and want to thank you for being part of Men Pursuing More podcast. And where can the listeners follow you?
Yeah, I really just go on Instagram. So you can go to Evan M. Peterson on Instagram. It's literally just my name with my middle initial. It's nothing too crazy. It might be Evan.M. Peterson. I can't remember. But if you look up Evan M. Peterson, I'll probably come up. But
anything else you'd like to promote? Any products, any service, or?
No, I don't know. If you're in college, get plugged into a college ministry. It doesn't have to be SALT. Just get around Christian community, get around people that are going to push you to be the best version of yourself, and get discipled, submit to leadership, find a mentor. So,
No, I appreciate your time. God bless.
yeah, thanks, Roger.
Hey, thanks for listening to Men Pursuing More podcast. Don't forget to follow us at maupincoaching.com.